One of my main passions is this: restoring order in Washington, D.C., getting our country back to a position of ethics. In our country, we have this guy called Donald Trump, and Donald Trump ran on the swamp. It's probably what gave people the belief that he is truthful, because the honest truth is that Trump benefited greatly from the swamp. And he was willing, as a person, that people who listened to him said, oh, this guy knows about what's wrong, the swamp. And so he tries to let you think that because he understands the swamp, that what he's capable of doing is doing the dialogue that this channel is all about how to restore honor. Because what I argue in this book is that, at least very briefly, because this book is more about creating legal and constitutional frameworks that we can do quickly to fix the swamp and restore honor. Trump made his money because of the swamp, or at least the sections of the swamp. His relationship with Epstein, which showed him like the immorality itself of DC, because one day people would be out there saying it's terrible. I think it was Cawthorn that said it. Briefly, Cawthorn said that, people who are here talking about virtues in Congress are out there inviting him into, sex parties with cocaine and all this stuff. That may have actually simply been that case, but probably many others. Because the reason why there's probably many others is because Donald Trump was good friends of Epstein, and Donald Trump was hearing the same bullcrap. Oh, you guys are really like hyper-Christian people. Really? Then why are you screwing 13-year-old girls with Epstein? Now, granted, Donald Trump also had sex with 13-year-old girls. Katie Johnson is the perfect example. I'll link to the video, to the clips of her area where she describes when she was 13 having sex with Donald Trump under sworn testimony, when she was kept actually in New York for Donald Trump. But leaving that out, this is about these particulars. When you see the thing about history, it's about trying to go into the history itself of the swamp. Now, I put to you that the swamp is basically great moral and ethical corruption that exists within our society that we would like to address, and that some people financially benefit from, and because they financially or morally benefit from the swamp, somehow get some sort of benefit, that they will maintain the swamp. And that's what Trump sold. And he sold it extremely effectively. The fundamental problem is that we fail to learn from history. Herodotus was the first great historian, and he was from ancient Greece. He was a Stoic. You see, back in those days, like before the Greeks, Herodotus would utilize history, or ancient Greeks would use history to try to teach morality on top of their beliefs with their gods, right? Try to give some sort of moral teachings to the people. And the reason why they had to do that is because you're talking about thousands of years ago, where it was easy to kill a person and never see a day in jail. It was easy to do terrible things and get away with it. It wasn't that complicated, right? Because there wasn't like a police force. There really wasn't a judicial system. The judicial system was whatever the king said. The king didn't like you, that was the end of you. So, but that's what we kind of forget about in our teaching of history. Because Herodotus and the ancient historians taught the lessons of history Our problem as a society is we stopped teaching. When you teach history to be an exploration of the moral and ethical challenges of those times and what people were doing inside of those incredible debates. What were the different factions and what were their arguments and which one is morally right, which one isn't, that sort of thing, to be able to pull those decisions into you to strengthen you. The problem is, and it goes to the swamp. So in the United States, our swamp goes back to the founding. If you believe that the swamp is simply morally and ethically corrupt things that the government or that our society is doing, where people are financially benefiting from or morally benefiting from, personally benefiting from, maybe not by cash, but it's giving them a sense of value. Now, I know that doesn't make any sense. How can the swamp give a person value? How can something that is immoral, that we believe is wrong, how can that give a person a sense of value? And the answer is simple. History. Today, we look back on certain things, and we see certain things as immoral, that was completely morally justified. Like, let's take one, the treatment of women. Let's just avoid slavery for now. We'll go into that later, but for now, let's just deal with sexism. Back in the days, it was the obligation of a gentleman that if a woman went crazy, to break her nose to remind the next man that this is a crazy woman, or that you could beat her with a stick no thicker than your finger. Things like that, and that they couldn't work. There's a lot of things that were very limiting about their ability to achieve anything more than being an object to give birth, and maybe do other smaller jobs. But the fundamental job of the woman back in the dawns of this country was to be compliant, obedient, and the definition of their contribution was emotional support, caregiver, and that you are to be giving birth. Now, men, let's just face it, very beneficial. Men did not make a lot of money, per se, by a woman being like that. There wasn't like wealth that you gathered outside of the fact of having a compliant wife, a compliant woman in your life. But there was emotional benefit to that men were gaining because of having women that were complacent and, baby makers, that sort of thing. That you weren't competing against them for careers or whatever. So what happens? You see, that's how you can, morally benefit from something that is like a swamp, which is depriving our society from the intellectual gifts that women have, their talents, their abilities that were beyond giving birth and being a compliant wife. So those are areas where you can morally benefit. One initial form of economic benefit that today we consider as immoral, child labor. Child labor is obviously the financial benefit, because a child can work very hard. They can work harder than older people. Their hands are more nimble, their bodies are more nimble, so they can fit into tighter places. So you're capable of getting more. So your business is capable of getting more things done by this labor. And this particular type of labor can help your business become more efficient because there are certain acts, labor acts, that a kid that is 13 years old, 15 years old, can do that 30-year-olds might not be able to do as effectively, namely smaller hands, younger bodies, that sort of thing. But these are immoral acts. These are the swamp. And this is where Herodotus comes in, and even slavery within the United States, obviously, where there were clear financial benefits for it because you were buying and selling people, you were earning money off of their labor. It provided you a sense of moral value because it provided the nation a sense of moral superiority, a belief that these things are less, that they feel superior because these people are this way and I can just do whatever I want. So not only can you just financially benefit, but you're also developing a moral value that you are morally superior to that of the slave. And so this is where we fail to get this. So there are people in swamps that happened where the swamp was more than 200 years ago on slavery, on sexism, and on child labor, for example, where there were financial benefits, moral benefits, that made them feel superior. The swamp in those areas changed and began to be cleaned up. But the people who resisted the change were the people who were getting the moral superiority, who were given the financial benefits of these things, and that's where it resisted. And for these exact same reasons is exactly why Donald Trump is the best person in the world to identify the swamp, because he financially benefits from the swamp. He is not the best person to solve the swamp. Historically, the people who are best capable of solving great moral and ethical corruptions within a society and addressing those moral and ethical corruptions within a society are those people who are the target of the swamp. The people who are rotting inside of the swamp when they decide to climb out. Those people are best because they understand the problem, because they've lived it. They understand what it means to be the target of it. So you need to be able to listen to those, and that's why this discussion of restoring honor is a discussion not just on these points that I talk about in the book, but it's a discussion about how to fix the swamp. Because the swamp is not going to be fixed by those of whom financially benefit from the swamp. They will resist it. They will resist it intensely. Hell, they will lie, cheat, steal, whatever. Because yes, the South, my party, Democrats, were slave owners. We were the Confederates. But you know what? It took great moral exploration to be able to change that. And again, what ultimately changed the Democratic Party from breaking from being the party of the Confederates and the party of Jim Crow was because the people who were subject to the targets of Jim Crow, black people, men like Dr. Martin Luther King, Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, those are just the more popular names, many others, walked towards Democrats, and because they lived our shortcoming, they changed the nature of the party. And that change came because the people who were the targets of the swamp, African Americans and other minorities, who were living and rotting inside of the swamp, some of them rose up and educated those who were benefiting, because yes, my party was benefiting. Our country was benefiting by separate but equal, both financially, morally, and many other ways. By having separate but equal, even with all of its bullcrap, people benefited. But the moment that you develop the conversations that Dr. King and others were created, those conversations were about us restoring honor. Because that is how you get rid of the swamp. You get rid of the swamp by calling people to a higher sense of value, a higher sense of honor and integrity and ethic. And you do that by having the people demand it. So this is the introduction video to what will be a whole lot of other videos on the history of the swamp and individual events within the swamp that ultimately called those who were benefiting from the swamp to change. And yes, it snaps back. But we don't have to have it snap back. That's not an inevitable human reaction. We can choose to not snap back, because how you prevent us from snapping back is you need to understand that when you just simply corrected the swamp by some legal action, there are still those who monetarily, morally benefit from the swamp who will try to bring it back. So you need to keep educating people or developing systems of law that render the actions of those of whom will want the swamp back, to render their actions unconstitutional and illegal. Thank you. I hope you got value out of this, and if you did, please like and share this video, and subscribe. That's just trying to help us grow to the point where, yeah, we can start restoring the honor of Washington, D.C., and begin this debate and solve this debate and clean the swamp by the American people collectively agreeing that the swamp must be ended, and that begins by restoring our honor. So please like, share, and subscribe.